Next on Rugby Wrap-Up, in a very important Community Corner segment, Derek Lipscomb, Dave Flemister, and Lawrence Blaber Jr. on the trials and tribulations of being a black man playing rugby and living in America. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub. The Murphy Kennedy Group, founded with the idea that construction can be done better. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan, talking rugby once again. And this time, I have some very special guests, friends of mine from a long time ago or more recently, but three very interesting gentlemen. And with what's going on in the world, I thought it was high time that I did something, and I don't know what this something is going to be, other than offer a platform for three guys that I respect, that I know have some things to say about what's going on. So with that, let me give you a brief introduction. First up, we have Mr. Derek Lipscomb, educator and diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator, founder of the Work Racial Literacy LLC, an educational resource website focused on enhancing conversations surrounding race and racially traumatic events. Co-founder of Roots Rugby, an Afrocentric rugby team looking to create opportunities to play rugby at a higher level. On the pitch, he's played for Old Blue, Team USA, Rugby United NY, the Major League franchise, and of course, Roots. And he's a smarty pants Columbia guy. Speaking of franchises, the legend of Niagara University Rugby, the Ghanaian-born, Bronx-raised Buffalonian, over 20 years as a rugby player, coach, and administrator, with runs with the Gotham Knights as a head coach and a rugby player with New York Rugby Club and an assistant coach with New York Rugby Club, Mr. Junior Blaber, a.k.a. Lawrence Blaber Jr., a.k.a. Junoi Blaber, when he is penning columns for Rugby Wrap-Up and or MeetTheMats.com. He is also a former Director of Business for African Communities Together, current Small Business Director for Pan American Community Development Initiative, and Sports Rain Man. And last but not least, my longtime amigo, Mr. David Flemister. We started playing for the New York Rugby Club in 1987 together. I got to see somebody faint on his altar as I was in his wedding party. Mr. Flemister started his rugby career at Connecticut College, played for the New York Rugby Club, the coolest club in the United States, established in 1929, also the oldest. Iona College assistant coach currently. He's an advertising executive, and he's an all-around good guy. Well, really, we'd like to be talking about something a little bit more pleasant, but let's get it's the elephant in the room, or the 800-pound gorilla, whatever it is. Is the stuff that's going on, protests, and I'm going to talk as little as possible for obvious reasons, but I want you guys to address some stuff. First and foremost, David, I've been around you the longest. I've known you the longest out of these guys, and I have watched you have to go into situations that I know made you uncomfortable. I've been in situations where I was uncomfortable because I knew you were uncomfortable. And I've seen you, and I've seen Junior, and I think Derek, to a certain extent, I've seen you have to measure your words and the way you carry yourself and your actions. Am I accurate to that, Dave?
You are. It's a tough world to navigate, and it has, I will say, over generations, shamefully, some of the same situations happen over and over again. The only thing I will say, and I've had this conversation both in the work environment and others, for the first time in over 30 years, I believe that, and I hate to overuse the word woke, but I think that more people that don't look like your three guests are woke and are now more sensitive than they've ever been before, and more accepting to the fact that things have to change than ever before. Before it was like, oh, it's a Black thing, or it's a multicultural thing, it's a whatever. It's about us. For the first time in my life, and I'm sorry that so many horrific things had to happen to make this come to life, there are people that are now raising a hand that are, so diverse than we've ever seen before. And I've had this conversation in my work environment. I have hope now that there will be change in the future, more so than I had, say, 3 decades ago.
I agree. Before I can even move forward, I think one of the things to address is being comfortable with the language being used too. So being able to say the words race, being able to say the words racism, black, police brutality, things like that, and kind of normalize it so that it doesn't feel like, I'm stepping into a new, arena here, but rather like these are things that are all around us at all times. And the more that we get a chance to kind of discuss them and name them, the more likely it is that we will have some onus in that conversation and bring more people into it. And so, just as somebody that does this work, as a job, it's just important to really kind of ground that conversation there so that, if you are feeling uncomfortable, you can lean into it a little bit more and kind of explore what it is that makes you uncomfortable when you say the word black or when you say the word racism, and really be okay to kind of extrapolate it from there.
That's an excellent point, because I'm a guy that you guys have been around, and I'm a guy that's had more exposure, if you will, to stuff in the inner city than other people that are like me, white guys, specifically middle-aged white guys. I coached at Harlem RBI for 11 years. I got a hardball baseball team called the Harlem Shaskies. So I got a little bit more exposure, but even now, because this is a show, I find myself measuring my words, like saying black, saying racism, just calling what it is, right?
Right.
So, and that's a good exercise for somebody to say, okay, all right, I can say that. I can't, I know what I can and cannot say, but now that I'm on camera, I felt like, yeah, you just pointed it out. I was kind of like uncomfortable.
How to dance. And I do think that, like, before anybody like listening presses that pause button, to really think about, what it is that is about this conversation that kind of has you kind of fatigued, even that like, oh, here we go again kind of deal, but rather just like, all right, this is a different take, or these are 3-4 individuals here that might be able to kind of add to my experience, and how can I use that as a learning piece and kind of grow a platform off of that.
I don't want to step on Junior, but one of the things, Matt, to your point,
go right ahead,
because I can. Because I'm the oldest.
I think you have physically stepped on me at one of these Boycotts games, but we'll keep going. We'll keep it going.
So Junior, I'll maybe I'll set you up, maybe I won't. I don't know. But I wanted to build on Derek's point, which everyone has to acknowledge, as we in our on the field lives and our work lives and our personal lives. It's like we all have prejudices. It's okay, but how you act upon them is where it can make a difference. Because if you negatively act upon them and use them to hold people down or judge people, that's where we have an issue. I hope that we all are open to realize that our prejudices can be accept people for their differences that they are. And not judge or act upon them and keep them down. And I think that's the key thing. And that's one of the things that, Matt, to your point earlier, had to deal with in rugby. The word rugby and black early in my career were almost an oxymoron. And judging the fact that we have multiple generations here, I feel like it's become less so. And I bet you, if we look at each of our the generations represented, the number of people on the team, in the league has increased.
A couple of things. Well, I remember one time I was with New York Rugby, and there was four of us on the same team. Well, and that felt great because for my whole career I'd been usually the only black guy. So there is that. But as a whole and as a society, it's okay to not know, and it's okay to almost have prejudices. The problem a lot of people have is willing to grow beyond that, willing to be uncomfortable. This race relations in America is going to take what I like to say a lot of awkward moments, hard questions, and and uncomfortable answers. And once people get their head around that, then they will go further. Now, when we talk about race relations, one of the things I like to point out to people, for instance, I was arguing in a rugby chat room with somebody, is the amount of thought I have to put into a simple exercise like walking my dog at night, I don't think anybody else does. Like I have to make sure I'm wearing a light colored article of clothing, nothing too dark. I want to make sure my phone has 15% battery in case I have to videotape anything or light anything. I need to make sure I have my driver's license with me so that I prove that I'm at the house. And I choose a path that's not by a lot of houses so nobody thinks I'm casing the joint. And this is all the things that a lot of times Black people have to go through in America that we don't talk about, because for a large part, hey, you see Jim at the office, you talk, how's your weekend? Great. Everybody knows everybody on a surface level. But that next level of everything I go through, we don't. And we don't have that conversation. And it's not easy, but I think that's what this situation has forced. And I think we can somewhat thank the fact that there is this pandemic going around. People can't go to work. You're stuck at home. So now you can't complain you're too busy to look at what's happening in your face.
I wanted to ask you a question. You were born in Ghana.
Yeah.
And you were raised in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me that you had an interesting first exposure to racism.
Yeah, the first time I remember was racing home with my friends. You know, you're just like last one home's a rotten egg. Start about a block into a cops pull us over. Why are you guys running?
Last one home could be dead these days.
Exactly. It's just, and that forever burns me, because I was just like, how many kids in the suburbs just race each other home and never have to go through this whole process of why are you kids running? Every white person I knew up until college was an authority figure of some sort, a teacher, even a bus driver, even a cop. And I didn't have a white friend until college. Now, I want to ask you guys about something that happens to me. What do you feel about the stress of being always the Black ambassador? Hey, Dave. Oh. Yeah, it's always like, hey, Dave, why do Black people like Beyonce? Hey, Derek, what's the whole thing with the ribs thing? It's like, it's constantly you're this guy who has to explain Black culture, whether you care to or not.
Well, I've realized that, part of my job, because I teach at a predominantly white school, and it's all boys, and I do it deliberately because I'm also in elementary school. So for a lot of those boys, I will be their first Black male teacher. And so I think about, my own experience there and how, I didn't have my first Black teacher until, not even male, but just my first Black one until I was in 7th grade. And so how many different questions kind of show up prior to that. And then, these boys are just inquisitive, and even some of my colleagues, and, you just recognize that, like, there's a certain piece of you that you always kind of keep professional, even when you're like at home. Like if somebody were to call you up, it's slipping right back into that space. And you realize that it's a bit of code switching to some degree. But, to the larger part, it's really just more about being able to represent not just you, but like your people quite well. Because you realize that, like, for a lot of these people, a lot of the kids included, you might be the only Black person that they talk to this week or this month. And that's
because you teach in one of those fancy pants schools.
Exactly. And so as a result, like, I've put it on myself to become that ambassador. And sometimes it is tiring and fatiguing, but the biggest part is that, like, to make sure that when they leave this place and they do interact with people of color, whoever they may be, they already have schema about, how to kind of navigate that space, or at least it's normalized to where it's not, tokenism at that point.
Oh, yeah.
I went to a fancy pants school and went on to college where I was one of 4 Black males to graduate. And, sadly, a school that, small school, 1,600 people, but understanding you have to be that ambassador. So it does add a little bit more pressure to make sure that you don't perpetuate any stereotypes.
Right.
because, you know, even if you just want to be yourself, you're always guarded.
I can't imagine that pressure at all. I mean,
it's not pressure because it's something you've had to deal with your entire life. It's a little bit odd. I grew up in New York City, very, very diverse, city, but it's something that makes you, have to think extra that other people don't have to deal with. And I will say, and this is something that I think will transcend generations. How many times have we heard, "Oh, he's so articulate"?
Mm-hmm.
You never, Matthew. How many times have you had anyone reference you?
Oh, you're the whitest black guy I know.
Right. Yes.
I've heard people say that. I've heard people say that to you.
Now you just like the Junior and Derek.
I've heard that so many times.
Mm-hmm.
It's
the
so
expression "douche chills." I can't really describe. That's what I got every time I'd hear that expression.
Yeah.
Or that.
But on the flip side,
the guys they don't think that is a racist statement.
Yeah.
Right.
They're starting to realize it now, but it for years. And Derek, go ahead, because you're probably dealing with parents, teachers, and students.
Yeah, and I was just about to say the reverse, because the reverse to them, when I say them, I say white people that use that statement. The reverse to them, would actually signify togetherness. So, if you were to say to a white person, "You're the blackest white guy I know," that makes a lot of people's day, largely because
that makes me cool.
Right. And so, because they kind of see,
I like that.
But because they kind of see it as I've been accepted into your space,
right.
That's what a lot of times they're pining for. And so on the flip side, they're thinking this is one way to disarm you, because if you are a black guy, that sounds dangerous, whereas if you're a white black guy, all of a sudden now it seems like I can have a conversation with you on an intellectual level, not understanding that you've already kind of put us on a social hierarchy. Yep. There that we now have to navigate all of a sudden. And so there's nothing to do with that statement other than call it what it is. It's a racist statement. And so I don't think white people, when they say it, and even some black people too, because I get it sometimes from my own race as well, about me having to quantify my blackness to some degree.
So do you call people on it now? I mean, do you finally feel that you're able to do that now because of the shit that's going on?
Well, I've always been able to do it, largely because I have the vocabulary to do it. And so being able to call it out, and not in a way that, is going to increase tension, but rather just come into a space of education, of let's pause and actually think about why what you just said might upset the next person you say that to.
Well, wait a minute. So just playing devil's advocate here, you're at a parent-teacher meeting,
mm-hmm.
and that comes up. You address it on the spot?
Yes, I would just say I would just, as I said, let's pause for just a second. Coming to you not as a teacher but as a black person, what you just told me is actually very racist. And usually you'll get a lot of sorries. It's super awkward, as Lawrence pointed out. But those awkward conversations are actually super helpful, just because I know the next time that they are going to be pushed to that space, they will immediately think oh shoot, I shouldn't say that. And that in itself is a learning experience.
All right, guys, this is flying by, but we do have to take a quick commercial break. So just stay with me, because we're on a roll now. We're starting to loosen up a little bit. We got to take a break. Hold on.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
We are back, guys. We had a brief conversation off camera because we're feeling out what we want to talk about, what we can talk about. Not that we can't talk about anything on this program. I'm not afraid of reprisals, guys, just to put you at ease. But it's more about your comfort zone.
One of the comments that come up a lot when you're speaking to people of color and referring to them, particularly I'd say of the three of us, oh, they're very articulate. And that is something that has happened, a lot. I'd say what we have on camera here are multiple generations that happened before. When I first got into the league and started playing rugby, it's like people were surprised that I spoke articulately, but the fact that it was something that was described, that was an adjective that would not be ascribed to any other person that played on the rugby team, was kind of, I'd say, insulting. It's something that I've never heard any person not of color described as being articulate.
I think it's largely because it comes with a certain weight, that adjectives, because I can imagine there's some viewers and listeners at home that are thinking like, but that's such a positive adjective to be described by, not understanding that historically, like, that adjective itself, particularly, articulation itself, carries a lot of weight. Even coming back from slavery, just, the surprise from white people when they actually hear a black person discuss something that they deem as intellectually weighted or intellectually,
they're not supposed to be educated.
Right. And so, when you get into that conversation and really pull apart the word articulation as it describes a person of color, then you can see why a person of color actually would feel some kind of way when they hear it. And that's regardless of who's saying it too, because I do think that at this point in time, it's got connotation with it. And so it's important to just kind of keep that in mind through these conversations too.
What is the vibe up in Niagara Falls / Buffalo for you, coming from the Bronx? Did you get people?
I tell you,
were you treated like uranium? Were you treated like an alien?
No, I mean, there is a black population in Buffalo and in Niagara Falls, but I mean, I drive and I sell real estate now, and so you drive in certain parts and you see a lot of Trump 2020 stickers and everything else, and that's one thing that it's weird, but just like saying MAGA symbolizes you're okay with so many levels of things wrong with this country. So there is that. But I think one of the things Dave touched on in the break that I kind of want to get back to is when other black people question your blackness because of how you talk or how you sound. And I think that is part of the overall culture that's been forced upon. And I have a weird view because I've lived in being Ghanaian and also raised in the U.S. I have two different views on media and stuff like that. But there is this weird thing that has become ingrained in Americans as to what a black person is supposed to act like and sound like. And it is believed by both blacks and whites how you're supposed to be. So you end up being not fitting into both. And black people are surprised. Black people feel offended, and it's just, and it's a hard thing to explain to anybody to feel not at home with either side.
It's saddened because I look at it to build on that, Junior, is like, that means the esteem of folk is, our expectations of ourselves, and I'm not talking about the three of us or even the four of us. I'll include you, Matthew, but our esteem is so demeaned that we believe that what people's perception of us are should be less than. We should not be able to be articulate, speak well, be educated. And that's, when it comes from people that look like you, it's actually more painful than when it comes from people that you expect it to come from.
It's interesting that you guys bring that up. I'm from urban white trash, New Jersey, Hudson County. I was born in Jersey City and raised in Hudson County. And when I went to college, the University of Buffalo, that Mecca, where Junior is now residing, I talked like this. I talked like a moron. And the guys in my dorm taped me. And I'm like, okay, I'm here in college. I'm going to learn how to speak. Right? So I go home and I'm just focusing on pronouncing words, right? Basically, instead of car, What are you doing? I grew up by the GWB. And my mother would always smack me in the back of the head trying to get me to speak well or better. But when I got home, some of my guys that I grew up with were like, oh, college boy. Oh, college boy. I'm like, what are you, stupid?
Right.
But, for me, that was different. It wasn't race. But when coaching Harlem RBI, I had certain rules with the kids. I had them from when they were 12, and I coached 11 years. And then I took a year off and then went back. But my rules were, A, you use proper English. B, you don't tell on your teammates. And C, you know the count any given time I ask you, wherever you are, whether you're on the bench or not. And they were like, what's with you have to speak properly? I said, I don't care if you hit 360 in baseball, but I want you to be able to turn it on and turn it off when you go out into the world and try to get a job. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And some of the kids were getting blowback from their friends on the bench when they would speak right or correctly. They retain that lesson, though, when I talk to them as adults.
I would push back there in the terms of like making sure that when they show up, they're always their authentic self, right? And so, and I, as somebody that's gone to Columbia and has to mold himself in order to like make sure that I can be seen by the Ivy institution as somebody that is competent, like, you've got to kind of code switch to a great degree, which does put a great deal of stress on the person itself. And so, I do think that, like, while I agree with you there, I do want to make sure that like we're in a space to where like however you show up, I get it, and like essentially we will be largely getting on the same page here, but I don't want you to feel like you've got to do a complete 180 in order for you to actually be here in this space. Now, does that mean that like you are going to be any kind of way when you're in here? Absolutely not. There's a certain level of professionalism you need to bring into the space, but we are going to foster that rather than me push it onto you so that you're not essentially having to turn it on and turn it off, but rather like you can gradually make the shift, and then eventually there won't be any reminders. You will just automatically be in the space, know that you're professional, and then can immediately kind of approach it in that manner, so that there doesn't have to be the whole like stressfully like traumatic type of transformation that has to happen, but rather it's going to be more organic.
All right, so you just were the ultimate diplomat and not telling me that I was just flat out wrong, which you don't have to do. Specifically, that's the whole point of this. That's one point I wanted to say to that. And the other point was we actually made it fun, where guys were actually, teammates were telling on each other that he just said ain't. And I said, all right, well, we had an expression, hit the fence. There was a fence about 100 yards away. They had to hit the fence, and they would try to get each other to hit the fence. So the kid would tell on his teammate for saying ain't. And I said, you just told on your teammate. I said, there's no telling on your teammates. Go hit the fence. And they were like, but they made a game of it. So it wasn't like,
because kids are still kids. Fun. Right.
I didn't try to force them to be something they weren't. I tried to give them another tool.
Mm-hmm.
Say,
and that's it.
Okay.
You labeled it perfectly. It's all about being able to give tools, right? And like, if I'm telling you to do something and you don't necessarily understand the reasoning behind it, then like you're not really going to be able to do anything with it if I'm not present. I there am the tool. Whereas if I'm giving you, that information or giving you that schema or that background there about why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing, then all of a sudden you actually have like a pedagogy in place, and like you can actually, focus on more about like, what does he want me to leave with, rather than focusing on like, he's just like dragging me right now type of deal. But yeah, I completely agree.
Junior, I know that you're flipping out over there. You want to talk. It's killing you.
I don't think, Matt, you didn't necessarily did anything wrong, but you're in a different situation. Like, I've done volunteer. Sometimes you're the only person who's actually watching their language. Derek is in a school atmosphere. He's got them for hours, and the school's bought in to a culture change. So if the kids are going there, they have 5 days a week from 8:30 to 3:30, somebody installing them. You get them for a couple of hours, and you're trying to change them. It's like when you have that one teacher in class who won't accept you're good enough, which was my I guess problem, or the one teacher that changed, because I didn't have to really try to get good grades, and that was the one teacher that was hardest on me, and that's what brings the best out of it. So I think both of what you guys do are fine. It was just a totally different situation.
All right, I don't want to step on toes here, but we do have the format, which is a little bit unforgiving for this kind of a conversation. But I got juniors. I'd like Derek, yours, and Dave, your respective first experiences with racism.
For me, at least, it largely because I grew up in segregated Cincinnati, Ohio, and the big thing there was like you knew where you could go, you knew where you couldn't go, the only real crossover you had there was just through the teams you played largely. And so, North College Hill is predominantly black, and we could be playing any sport, what have you, but we would also cross over with some of the private schools there too. And so it can be microaggressions here and there about, at least I know my dad, or like, your skin looks like poop, whatever you want to call it. But in terms of like definitive, like this is clear cut, I was stopped and frisked multiple times throughout my time here in New York City. And one of the most jarring times for me, at least, was when I was leaving the school. Like I was working at Collegiate at the time. We're about to go on, or I think we actually were on spring break at that time. And I came in, just to like do a bit of work in the classroom. And I didn't really think about what I was wearing, which I should have. But I had on a hoodie and some Adidas track pants. And so, I walked in, just did like all my work. It's probably spent, a couple hours there. And then, I'm leaving. And so, the police sitting across the street, like didn't even have to make a motion. All they had to do was just like motion me over, essentially. Like they just like, come on over. Like,
like
I have my backpack.
Like it's a given.
Yeah, and so you already know if you run, then who knows what's going to happen next. But we've got an answer for you right now. So you're already in a space where like you can't necessarily advocate for yourself. You just got to comply. And so you get a series of questions, and like the only thing you can do is just kind of stand there. And so I asked the question like why am I even here? And so like we'll get to you in a second. But they rifled through my bag.
This is as you're coming out of Columbia.
No, I was at Collegiate. So I was already a teacher. I've got a job. I'm a grown man at this point.
Collegiate High School in New York City?
Yeah. Yep. And so this is back when they were on the Upper West Side, not, their new location. But, that was something for me, at least, where eventually they said like, oh, well, there's a guy that robbed a store and you fit the description. I was like, what was the description? I'm just curious. And like, you can clearly tell that like, they were like, we're not having this conversation with you. Like, obviously here's your stuff, get away from us. But like, you as a person there do want to kind of ask a little bit more. You want to be able to get an answer, but you realize like, that was your luck right there. The fact that you were walking away from this situation, do not press any further. And so for me, at least, like, other people are like, oh, you should have got their badge numbers. You should have did all these other things. But like, you recognize that like, there's nothing that's going to be held accountable in that space.
David?
My first A-side game, I worked my way up, and, not only do we have a very few as New York Rugby Club African-American players, but we had very few in the league Jewish players. And I'm not going to name names, but a Jewish player came up to me and it's like, this weekend, we're playing the AC, you're on the east side, and this is the history of this team. They persecute Jews, blacks, so make sure you bring out your best game. And I will say that my experience getting on the field, going into that with that kind of history, it was confirmed when I got onto the field that.
Was it the New York Irish that we were playing against?
No, it's New York Athletic Club.
Oh, okay.
So it's an elitist club, and at the time, with a lot of elitist members. You said the first, it's not the only, because
right. Because I've been on the field with you.
Yeah, I could go everything within our league, and then the jersey I'm wearing now was worn by the captain of the Goshawks, which was a South African select side team. He insulted me to begin the game, and at the end of the game, he actually gave me his jersey, which that's the only reason why I keep it. It's like, obviously,
you remember the year?
I want to say it's probably 1990. 4-ish.
So it's
Around-
pre-Invictus.
Yes, before that. The only reason why I take pride in it is because I know that there is one situation where I was able to change someone's
Perspective.
Yeah, and that's sometimes, we can only do it one at a time, but that was one time that I know that going in, he had one perspective, and leaving, he had another. And I would hope that his perspective changed not only on the field, but his experiences beyond.
Okay. The follow-up question, what was your most recent experience with racism?
With the president that we have in office, and there are some people that are on the, a team and a club and a family that I truly respect and appreciate, that there are some members that have different views that have expressed them, and
I'll say what you're not saying is that they don't even know that they're racists when they're saying certain things. I've witnessed that.
They don't know what they don't know, and that's unfortunate. And I have a few friends or a few people that I call friends in my rugby life, in my personal life, that it's not unusual. But if I can build on that, as a coach I own a rugby club, Bruce McLean has done a great job of doing one thing, many things, but one of the things he's done really, really well is he ends every practice making sure there's unity. And as part of that unifying element, he has one of the African American or any of the people of color end the practice, that they're the ones that no one can leave until they do a Iona rugby cheer, and that's led by that person. And that brings, I believe, people together, and it unifies the team, and it also makes people aware of other cultures, because every time he does that, that person still, to this day, as Junior stated, I stated, and I think Derek stated, we're usually one of the few. It brings the masses around the minority and brings us together. So I think that is something that is really special. And, whether it be in the work environment or the game environment, whatever it is, when that opportunity comes, it is nice if we can recognize that there are minorities, whether it be LGBTQ, African American, other people of color, having that sensitivity and unity, I think is will help us all be better going forward.
We are running out of time, so I want to get to a couple of more questions. Derek?
This entire summer has been a real stress test for a lot of the rugby teams and a lot of the programs that we've kind of been seeing. And, I'm sure Matt, as well as the rest of you guys, have just kind of seen, the war zone that is our social media feeds, and how are we going to come back, once rugby's up and running, to have a space where that guy that was just talking out of the side of his mouth is now going to be sharing the field, with the person he was talking to. My job is largely to kind of mitigate some of that stuff, to be able to kind of talk about it a little bit more. But I do think that a lot of clubs are going to be on the ropes here, thinking about, when the inevitable, next unarmed black person getting killed happens, and rugby's happening at the same time, how will the club address it? It's not going to be just, let's wait for our resident black guy to say something, but rather, is there going to be top-down energy that's going to be showing up there?
Because a resident white guy to say something before we have to say something?
Right. And so, and bringing credence to it, all of a sudden it has weight because this other white guy spoke up first, rather than, can we actually generate, just given what we've seen over the summer and what we've been all experiencing on these social media feeds, that our rugby teams, as much as we preach unity, culture, what have you, are going through the stress test right now. And, some have actually spoken to people off of social media, but others have kind of let some of that stuff sit, let a lot of like racist statements sit. And so if we're expecting, to kind of mend that culture when we come back onto the field, that's going to be very difficult to do unless there's going to be an honest conversation there. So, I would imagine, for me at least, like this entire summer, even going into November, because it's an election year, is just going to be an overall like prejudiced, racist experience. And we have to normalize it, only because I think through that we can really start to piece apart, what is it about it that's kind of giving off that feel, or what do we need as a rugby team in order to kind of move past this together, which I'm more than certain coaches, board members, and things like that are talking about. But it's gonna really come down to kind of just being held accountable and being able to say, like, we didn't do this well enough in the past, but this is us.
Got to do a better job.
Right.
I mean, we've been saying that as a white community over and over again with lip service, and I think that maybe finally we have, specifically with some of these boycotts in professional sports that some don't deem as deserved or wise. I disagree. That opens eyeball. Junior, quick question for you: your latest experience with racism on a personal level?
I was on the phone with a foreign person, and they were talking about the neighborhood they wanted for the house, and they wanted to make sure it didn't have a lot of black people there.
How do you navigate that, though, Lawrence?
Well, I just remind them that, we have the 9 protected classes, and you can't really say that, and then you just
You telling me black?
No. That he can wait for that when he sees me. And I'm going to keep the same level of professionalism. I'm not going to get into a speech or anything like that. But, he's going to we're going to get him this house that he wants and move on from that.
2 questions. Role models on and off the pitch, and is rugby less racist than real life?
I've kind of found a lot of energy and kind of, with Roots a lot of time, just kind of, glomming onto.
And explain Roots for people at home.
Oh, sure. So Roots is largely, it's Afrocentric. So you can play if you are not of color. You can play as a white person. You can play as, whoever that you come forward as. But
can a shitty sevens or player play?
Yeah, by all means.
Shitty white
while we are
player specifically.
Of course.
You cannot play.
Yes. And, the point there is that, the thing that we are really attracted about is, where's your energy when it comes to these types of conversations, when it's coming to race, when it's coming to police brutality, are you going to be vocal? We do want to encourage more people to be able to speak up about this, just because I do think that activism in sports does go hand in hand quite well. And I think for that reason, it's really easy to kind of look up, if you will, or look across the field to my own like teammates, when I'm wearing, the Roots jersey a lot of times, because I know what they've been through, right? And I know that a lot of their experiences, have to do with, what I've experienced too as a rugby player. And so, I think it's important to kind of hone in on that and realize that, like, these are the people that inspire me and that I can rally around as well.
So it's more of a collective peer thing for you.
Yes. And I gain a lot of energy watching other people, kind of endure that with me. In terms of whether or not racist or, rugby is more racist than not than real life, the jury's still out on that. I think, time will tell what, the next 2 months, 3 months brings us. As it stands right now, I'm still optimistic. I have hope that, like, we can lead the charge in terms of getting more guys to kind of share their experiences, just like we're doing here, but, more so to have those conversations about, bringing equity into the conversation, about bringing equality into it as well. So,
one, I think rugby is a neutralizer, and I think that, we're all on the field together and we're kind of in battle. And for the most part, I feel that on the field and as a club, we all are united, and some of the bigotry, racism gets put aside, and we are, on the field as a club, people look at ourselves, look at each other as whom they are. The other point that I want to make is for you, for the show, for each other, I would love to have us have an additional conversation that not only has the three of us, but the three of us with some people that don't look like us, so we can continue to share viewpoints, and get other opinions, and maybe continue to figure out how we can solve and collaborate and kind of unite feelings together, something like that.
That's a little payola. That's at least a pint.
Easy enough.
All right, that's
Give
going
it
to cost
COVID.
a pint.
I'll
Then we'll get
take
Lewis
it.
to pay for it. Junior.
I think rugby is less racist overall. I think there's a general curiosity, but rugby's heart is usually found in the fact that the large number of people get into it at college, so you get more college-educated people, which tends to lead you to a people with a bit more open mind, a bit more life experience. So role models, POW and Nam, and his whole thing was never confuse the unwilling belief that we will get out of a situation with the harsh reality of the situation. Yes, you will eventually overcome, but you have to recognize how hard it will be. And
So
that's how I view.
Is that kind of a message of hope?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way. We've got a longer way. We've got more of a way to go. But I mean, I believe we've made incredible progress, and just having this discussion and learning to be a little bit uncomfortable and settling into that uncomfortableness is progress.
Hopefully this will help stir a conversation or help people understand things. If nothing else, Derek, you're early on when you were explaining how people don't know how to ask or say or how to, just get over it.
Yeah. I've got an entire website that is dedicated to getting the conversation started.
What's the website?
It's called thework.education, and it's largely just for people that are thinking to themselves, how do I get involved? How do I get started? And, and it's a great tool just to kind of get the ball rolling for those that are feeling kind of stuck.
I just wish I could wave a wand and make your lives easier, fellas, and I can't. But it's at least I got this forum. At least we can get some of it out, and I think it was positive.
All I will say is the key for progress is just how did I phrase it earlier? Awkward questions, hard answers, uncomfortable situations. Once we get ourselves around that and accept that, this was uncomfortable a bit. It was a bit awkward, Matt, but you learned a bit from it, and we're all better for it. And that's the only way we're gonna get better.
I grew up in the world of advertising, and they say it again, and say it again. So work.education.org. And Matthew, please promote this segment as much as possible. And I will say thank you on behalf of the three of us for doing what you did and putting this together, because it's, for me, from the heart, awesome experience. And I know that, you did this from your heart. So we appreciate you.
Very much so. Thank you.
Well, again, it's a feeling
Thank you very much, Matt.
that spurs it, but I appreciate your kind words, fellas. And on that note, on behalf of Mr. Derek Lipscomb, Mr. David Flemister, and Mr. Lawrence Blaber Jr., a.k.a. Junior and Junior, I'm Matt McCarthy for Rugby Wrap-Up in Midtown Manhattan. Stay safe, everybody.